You like that? You like that?
Welcome in, Mackey and Judd with Ramie, hour number 2 today. If you missed hour 1, go back and listen because it was a great hour, not because of us, but because of PJ Fleck joining the show and because of Dick Bramer joining the show to tell twin stories and to talk about his new book. And it gets better because Darren Doogie Wolfson, our friend, is here from the Scoop Podcast and 5 Eyewitness News. And Doogie, we're sitting here. It's the second week of NFL free agency, and the Vikings still have about $14 million in cap space and a bunch of positional needs, including wide receiver. Well, Robbie Anderson just signed a 2-year deal to go play with Teddy Bridgewater in Carolina. So empty your Vikings free agency notebook for us on the show. Fire away.
I will do that. Hello, gentlemen. I'm not quite sure that the show gets better with me on. I mean, especially after PJ and Dick. I mean, many would argue the show is taking a significant step back.
No,
but I appreciate you welcoming me.
Dudes, we're crescendoing right into our favorite thing.
Reckless speculation.
Good call. I like it, Phil. Well, here you go. Okay, so $14 million remaining, which could easily turn into $20+ million, depending on what they do with Anthony Harris. I can tell you that there is an NFC team that has talked parameters of a contract with Anthony's representation. I don't know specifically what team. I have a feeling it's an NFC East team. No, it is not Washington, because if we're trying to connect some logical dots, I do think that Trent Williams, the free agent or the Redskins offensive lineman, has fans over in Eagan. I mean, undoubtedly, the Vikings, I think, have interest in Williams. The question is, can they get what they want for Anthony Harris, which, I mean, they're being realistic. I don't think they're getting a 2, but can they get a 3? Then could they peddle that particular pick to Washington for Williams, then work on a long-term deal for Williams? There's some chatter out there about him wanting $20 million a year. I think his camp is realistic. I texted with somebody that knows Williams today. I think $20 million is an overstatement. He's not getting his wish. He's not getting out of Washington and getting $20 million a year. But there's still the issue of what Washington wants in terms of a trade package. So there's all sorts of moving parts, because I also think, guys, that there is a scenario that they've discussed over in Eagan that entails Anthony Harris being back in purple. So I think there's a lot of things up in the air. I think one of the issues with the Vikings right now is whatever team that is, that NFC team that is kicking the tires with Anthony, that has talked some contract parameters with his camp, I think there's some hurdles in terms of what compensation they would give the Vikings. So I think that's the next domino to fall. It's possible the Vikings sign one of these journeyman cornerbacks that's still out there. They were not in on Robbie Anderson, I can tell you that, especially at that money that he got in Carolina. But it's possible, they'll get in on one of these wide receivers. They did kick the tires on Dorsett before he went to Seattle today. His representation also represents Travis Benjamin, who went to San Francisco today. So the Vikings sort of kicked the tires on those guys. They're kicking the tires on some other guys. I heard they kicked the tires on Devontae Booker, a free agent running back. Now, it's not like running back is a position of need, but Gary Kubiak likes Booker. If they end up losing Amir Abdullah, maybe he would slide into that role. But I think Devontae Booker is probably good enough to be some team's number 2 running back. But I would keep an eye on Williams. Until the Redskins move Williams, undoubtedly there's multiple teams in on Williams. But I can just tell you, I would be shocked if the Vikings haven't talked to Washington, because I'm telling you, the Vikings, there are fans in Eagan, in that building, in TCO Performance Center, that would love to have Williams as the Vikings left tackle.
Hold on.
Yes.
There we
They
go.
are.
Oh, was my mic not on? Sorry about that.
We thought you were just great at miming in front of the cameras there.
Trent Williams fits the description of the type of player I'm about to ask you about, Doogie, but do you know if they've talked in any of these discussions and shopping Anthony Harris around about getting a player in return who can help them win football games now rather than a draft pick, which helps you a little bit more down the road?
My understanding, Ramie, is if they end up trading Anthony Harris, it would be for a draft pick. Anthony's a really good player. Like, you can make a case for keeping Anthony. Why not? I mean, I get it. You don't want to be paying 2 safeties $22 or $23 million combined. I understand that, but he is really, really good. So I'm just telling you, if they end up trading Anthony Harris, I'm positive it's tied to some other move. By the way, let me give you another name that they're in on. Nicole Roby Coleman. I don't know if I'm saying his first name properly.
You are. Colin loves this guy.
Yeah. So they're in on him, but my understanding is, much like Mackenzie Alexander, they lowballed Mackenzie. Maybe it's just because of the situation they're in, but they weren't willing to go to $4 million on Alexander before he bounced to Cincinnati. Right now, they're only talking the veteran minimum for Roby Coleman. And he's not coming here for the veteran minimum. I mean, I guess, maybe, I guess I can't sit here and say 100% definitively he's not coming here for the veteran minimum, but I would be surprised at this point on March 24th or March 25th or March 26th if Roby Coleman said, yeah, let me come there for the vet minimum, because I know Philadelphia's got some interest in him, some other teams. So, yeah, I mean, they're still doing some stuff. They're on the phone. They're certainly somewhat active, but I still think the next domino to fall is whatever happens on Anthony Harris. Maybe the Vikings sign him to a long-term deal, or they complete a trade.
Let's talk about Dalvin Cook, Dukes. In the last, 2 weeks now, Todd Gurley got cut by the Rams and signed a cheaper deal, clearly, with the Falcons. Melvin Gordon, a year ago, held out, turned down a pretty lucrative offer from Los Angeles Chargers, and just signed a much less lucrative deal with Denver. And given the climate and circumstances that we're in right now, and I'm not saying that the National Football League is going broke, but certainly things are changing here. Does Dalvin Cook need to reset his parameters or his goals? Because 2 months ago, I think we all correctly assumed he's not going to go to OTAs. If they don't give him a new multi-year contract, he's probably going to hold out. But his position and the circumstances surrounding the league, at least a little bit, have changed. Do you think Dalvin Cook and his reps need to refocus on what their goal is for 2020?
Maybe eventually, Judd, but I think they are still going to aim for the moon when those talks pick up here in the coming weeks. I think their view is, what would that offense be without him? Now to me, what sort of leverage does he have? I don't foresee much leverage outside of the Vikings being pretty bad if he doesn't report, whenever training camp begins. I mean, in terms of OTAs, I think at this point, OTAs are not happening. I don't think mini camps are happening. I happen to think best case scenario is maybe training camp, in late July. But if he's not out there and he's not out on the field in August, and then as we approach week 1, I think a lot of us would be spelling doom and gloom for the Vikings. So I think the Cook camp would be hopeful that narrative would get out there. But otherwise, look at Melvin. I mean, what leverage exactly did Melvin have? I guess I missed what leverage he had with the Chargers. So yeah, probably eventually. I think they need to recalibrate Judd, but I think those initial talks will be that they want him to be the highest paid running back in the National Football League.
Boy, this is I feel like there's still so much that could potentially happen here for the next couple weeks for the Vikings. And the conversation that we started the week with, Doogie, actually goes back to last Friday, is if you knew that the Vikings were going to lose all these players, all these defensive key players, not that they weren't planning for it, would you still have signed Kirk Cousins to that extension guaranteeing $61 million? So my question to you is just based on what you've observed and heard, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do Vikings decision makers love Kirk Cousins? I mean, 10 being, oh my God, if he could play here till he's 40 years old, let's just keep shoveling money to Kirk Cousins. And a 5 being whatever, it's a chair in the game of musical quarterback chairs. Where do you think the organization falls?
I think it's somewhere between 5 and 10, probably closer to 10, although undoubtedly it's not 10, Phil. I think they view him and like him more than a good portion of the fan base. I think there's also a thought that how do you do better? Can you do better? Like on Cam Newton, you want to throw out Cam Newton's name. How can you sign him without being able to bring him in for a physical? That's the hurdle right now with Everson Griffin.
Yep.
There are teams that want Everson Griffin. Tampa likes Everson. Seattle, Dallas, the 2 New York teams. There's some other teams, the Raiders, the Redskins. I mean, there's a bunch of teams. Cleveland, actually has some interest in Everson. There's a bunch of teams that have some interest in Everson, but my understanding is nobody wants to sign him. Now, this could change. Maybe it changes via a bunch of FaceTime calls or some Skype dialogue or what have you. But a lot of these teams want to bring Everson in for a visit just to make sure he's in a good spot. He was in a good spot 2019, but let's not forget all the hurdles he had, off the field in 2018. So these teams, before committing any sort of, guaranteed money to Everson, want to make sure he's in a good spot. I think with Cam, physically, you need to make sure he's healthy, so I think they would struggle with who is the alternative. Plus, I guess in the case of Kirk, Phil, maybe we can debate whether Michael Pierce was money well spent, but they did create, $10 million in 2020 salary cap space, and he doesn't have a no-trade clause moving forward. And I still think Shanahan out in San Francisco would love to have Kirk, so maybe the Vikings have that to fall back on if everything goes miserably, this year, that maybe this time next year they engage San Francisco in some trade dialogue.
Do you know if they trade Anthony Harris and free up that cap space, if there's any interest in going after Jadeveon Clowney if he's still on the market?
I've not heard Clowney's name attached to here. I'm not suggesting there's not anything there, Ramie. I just personally have not heard that. I think it would be more along the lines of trying to fix the offensive